0.0001 over 1,000 feet below the height of the surrounding terrain in clouds, and with no clue that they're heading straight towards a mountain terrain ahead. Stay tuned. Have you ever heard the phrase rubbish in, rubbish out? Well, this refers to when you enter something faulty into a computer, which then causes you to get something equally faulty back. And in the world of aviation, with its ever more complicated computer systems, this holds a special significance back in 1995. One of the deadliest disasters involving a US 40 carrier took place when the crew of American Airlines Flight 965 failed to spot that they had programmed the wrong waypoint into their flight management computer. This was a single innocuous error, but one that led the aircraft onto a track toward high terrain, without the pilots even noticing it, until it was too late now. The aviation industry learned a very hard lesson on that day, so after that, strict confirmations of waypoints and computer inputs have been drilled into all pilots. So that should mean that 000114, a similar accident shouldn't be possible today. Right? Well, this brings us to today's story, which took place on the 10th of November. 2016, this day was supposed to have been a standby duty for the two involved pilots. But late in the afternoon, on the 9th of November, the Ware Operations Controller had called them up and informed them that they would need to operate 4 flights on the following day. The first of those flights was going to be a positioning or ferry flight from Budapest in Hungary over to NIS in 000144 Serbia. And these kinds of ferry flights are occasionally required when an aircraft needs to be brought from one airport to another for technical or operational reasons. What it means is that basically the pilots will position the aircraft themselves and sometimes their cabin crew without any passengers, and this can often lead to a more relaxed atmosphere on board. So when the pilots eventually turned up to their crew room in Budapest on the 13th of November, they likely looked forward to this first flight. It's always fun to do. 000214, something slightly different now. Neither of them had flown to this airport before, so when they started going through the pre-flight material, they probably looked a bit closer at the arrival and approach short to try to figure out what they could expect, as well as, of course, the overall weather and not. But everything looked reasonably straightforward, so when they were happy with the preparation, they just went over to brief their 4 cabin crew colleagues, who were likely also looking forward to a very relaxed start of their 00242 day. Now as they all walked out to the aircraft, a shiny Airbus A32200. The pilots decided that the first officer was going to be pilot flying for this first fair flight leg, and the captain would therefore be pilot monitoring. But this makes sense to me, as they were flying to a new destination, and when you're a captain, and it's always nice to do that as pilot monitoring, because that gives a better overview of the general operation and enables you to spot any potential issues early and then plan for 000310 them. Or at least that's the idea. Now there might of course be situations where the captain have to be pilot flying, especially if the runway is short or there are other operational limitations, but this was not the case here, even though the approach looked a little bit tricky when they entered the cockpit. The captain first checked the technical status of the aircraft, which was perfectly fine. There was no technical issues open, so he quickly then went outside to start a walk around, while the first officer started setting up the 000338 cockpit as he was doing, so one of the flight attendants asked if she could stay in the cockpit for the flight, and the pilot agreed, or maybe it was the other way around. And it was the pilot who asked, "We don't really know for sure." But this is not unusual on positioning flight, since it gives the cabin crew an opportunity to both enjoy the views from the flight tech, but also to get a better understanding of the workload that the pilots are facing during different phases of flight. Something that is otherwise pretty hidden nowadays, behind 000406, the locked cockpit door for us pilots. It's also nice to get a chance to talk to our cabin crew colleagues a bit, something that short-haul pilots rarely get a chance to do nowadays, but it can also create an environment which can become a little bit too relaxed and therefore lead to distractions if it's not managed well. So who were the pilots of this flight? Then, well, the captain was 62 years old and very experienced. He had flown over 22,000 hours in total, with nearly 5,500 on the Airbus A3200040 438 family on this day. He said that he felt all right, but that he had not gotten much quality sleep during the previous night, so he also felt a little bit tired. His co-pilot was 49 years old and also relatively experienced with nearly 5,000 hours.